Welcome, and welcome to our famous Compass Room. Many of you who spent time at our Global Entrepreneurship Congress know that we have at least one room where we sit in a round like this, where we want to actually have a summit, and we want to share our thoughts. But apologies to all the people who are not around the table, but knowing that you are very much a part of this conversation. So for those of you I've not met, I'm Jonathan Ortmans, and wanted to lead this discussion because part of what we've been doing at GEN over the course, well, really all of what we've been doing at GEN over the course of the last 14 or 15 years is trying to build healthier entrepreneurial ecosystems. We didn't really call it that when we began that work, but we've been, at all times, we were known for trying to work on creating a better enabling environment that would allow us to increase rates of new firm formation and allow more people from all backgrounds to start or scale companies. And when I say all backgrounds, I don't just mean demographically, I also mean geographically, and I mean in terms of people that have some or no knowledge of what it means to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to take this meeting to say there has been a substantial amount of work on ecosystem building done, quite frankly, by many people in this room. And some of the people who are well known for this work are sitting humbly in the chairs outside of this table. And I want to acknowledge the fact that the Kauffman Foundation, for which we have been intricately connected over the course of the last 15 years, the longest serving grantee of the Kauffman Foundation now, has been really a driver in ecosystem building, as you all well may be aware. Kauffman, of course, led its eShip summits and drove the process of really trying to elevate the field into one that was, shall I say, respected across the board by both scholars, economic development officials, governments, and corporations, and not just, as it was often perceived, as being a community building fabric. And in that process, of course, as many of you may have participated and been a part of this, and if you're not familiar with it, we have all the information available to you. The foundation put forth values, produced principles, produced a lot of what we might describe the dots that we need to connect. But when we at GEN try to work as we do predominantly outside of the United States, we came across an awful lot of communities that told us, we really appreciate that, thanks for sharing that. We're in a hurry and we really want more guidance. And while none of us who mentor like to tell people how or what to do, every now and again there are communities that say, could you please help me connect the dots a little bit more to get me started? And so our work right now going forth in 2024 is very much around a little bit more of a practical toolkit, a practical roadmap, a practical process, not because we necessarily think that that's always the best way to be able to mentor and coach and guide, facilitate community development around entrepreneurship, but because we've got a lot of asks from a lot of communities that said, we want a little bit more help. We want you, they're not asking us to do it for them, but they're asking for a more definitive roadmap. So we have put together a few principles that I've put on some screens here that I wanted to show, and then I'd like to very quickly tell you what they are, and then we're going to have a discussion over the course of the next hour where we're going to invite one or more of you to comment on how you've been doing this in your community. So very quickly, these are very much aligned with the thinking that the likes of SourceLink and IEDC and, of course, the Kauffman Foundation, Andy Stoll, of course, our wonderful Cecilia Wessinger, and many of you in this room. I'm looking at our North Texas team. I'm looking at being very much part of this, part of the development of these concepts. But when we talk about it outside of the United States, this is what we're telling people right now. So first of all, I always like to start with our reminder for every meeting at GEN, and that is, let's remember that entrepreneurs are our true north. It's very easy for us to get involved in things and focus on the fact that we're into mentoring and coaching and, accelerators and financing, and, we're all talking to other B2B organizations, but we have to remember that the reason we're here is to enable more entrepreneurs to be successful. As I mentioned in my talk this morning, I've sort of begun to think of us all, and I'm not talking to the entrepreneurs in the room, but I've tended to think of the rest of us as really being the first responders for all of our entrepreneurs in our communities. So make entrepreneurs your true north, but here's the difference of this. You don't really have a quorum in an ecosystem conversation unless you have entrepreneurs present. Meaning it's rather like, being in the Wild West and I haven't got anybody that's going to rein me in if I'm really being incredibly irrelevant to entrepreneurs in what we're actually thinking. The second thing is, you'll notice that data comes up twice in our process. Once to say, collect initial data for designing the priority. So what are the things that you have you actually collected information from a macro level that says, these are the things that really matter. I'm going to give you an example of this. We just done this in Turkey, and we went through this entire process, and at the end of the day, it turns out there were just two things that they really felt were the major roadblocks. They could come up with a list of 20, but they focused on two. And so we actually decided that data of collection, those are the things that we were going to get full engagement in trying to address in their ecosystem work. Foster shared volunteer leadership and collaboration. So this is very much around understanding that you've got everybody involved in the leadership process. Very important early on, connecting the existing community infrastructure and assets. One of the things we've discovered is that communities, and this is something definitely learned in the United States, but communities have if you look at the United States and ecosystem builders around previously, I see Maria's here, so I have to be careful about this, but sometimes we looked and said, well, you've got all those sort of community builder ecosystem types, then you've got the economic development types, then you've got the corporate types, then you've got, and there's Ted Zolla, you got the guys in the university running the university ecosystems. And I'm not entirely sure, I mean, they all know each other and they like each other and they'll say nice things about each other, but I'm not sure that they're properly connected. And when I say properly connected, at the outset of ecosystem building, we're putting forth a concept that you have to leverage the existing resources in the community rather than trying to go raise money to do what you're doing at the beginning. You have to turn around and say, okay, what can UNC offer us? What's SourceLink already got under the belt? But more importantly, what are the corporations who are already interested in doing this doing? So connecting that original set of assets. Next, professionalizing, something that's been very much part of the Kauffman Foundation message, which is, you have to professionalize ecosystem building in the community. It's got to be elevated to the status of being a true professional role. Having then done that, you then have to work on how am I going to integrate a multi-year data collection process to measure impact and obviously KPIs. So we very much believe that you need to bring the professional rigor and discipline to actually working out what is my 10-year plan, how am I going to measure it, what's my impact, because that's what's going to ultimately bring you funding in the long run. Something that we'll be doing storytelling sessions that Cecilia will run on Thursday, but something not new to anyone in this room, tell authentic stories that paint pictures all can understand. If you're trying to include people, you have to speak and tell stories that everybody will understand. Anybody saw my remarks this morning, I'm very much advancing a notion that as an entrepreneurial ecosystem, we need to be telling each other more stories, but perhaps more importantly, we need to be trying to listen better to everybody else's stories. And this is a message to myself all the time, try to be quiet. Like I was thinking, could I actually come to this conference for an entire day and say nothing and just listen? I mean, it would be really great if I could do it, but I'm really learning. I'm a work in motion. With goals, data, and stories. So now you got these 3 stories, seek multi-year funding. So the idea is that frequently in ecosystem building, people went to funders in the community, whether community foundations, local government, companies, sponsors, and they asked for money at the beginning of the exercise. Don't bother doing that until you've got a really good case to go in and say, you know what, you really want to support us because we've got our act together and we know what we're doing, we've integrated the community, we can tell our story, we know what we're measuring against, and we know where we're going to go. If you're a funder, you're going to be much more likely to want to support that. And then, of course, something that we advance very strongly at GEN around the world, which is please share and listen to other ecosystems around the world, and then iterate and add. And of course, this is done in your communities, it's done in states, it's done in the United States, but this is something we try to do on a global level at things like the GEC, which is to very much share what's working, what's not working, what can I learn in my culture, or what can I learn from another culture about how what I'm trying to achieve could be more effective. So I wanted to summarize those, but I wanted to invite representatives around the table, if you can, to give us a little bit of thought about what's worked or not worked for you when you're trying to do one or more of those things. And if I can, just because we have a special gratitude and spotlight that we have this week on some people that are very important to us, namely the people of the great state of Indiana, because in case you didn't know this, the next GC will be in Indiana next June. And so we're very, very excited that we have Morgan Allen here with the Indiana Economic Development Agency. But Morgan, more than being with the economic development community, is really well known for her work in ecosystem building. Morgan, I put up a slide there, and I talked a little bit, about storytelling. I talked a little bit about, the importance. I'm trying to go backwards here. Lost my numbers on these, but and a few of these, for example, connecting the existing community infrastructure and assets. There's a few of these that maybe using different words you have had considerable experience with. Share with us a little bit about your experience at IEDC and how this has been, what you can share with us about, and either push back on any of these or how have they been effective for you?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Jonathan. And we are so excited to welcome you all to Indianapolis for GEC 2025. If you haven't saved the date yet, it is June 2nd through 5th, 2025. Registration should be opening soon. I think we're aiming for the next month or so. I've been fortunate to work for the state's Economic Development Agency for 5 years. 2 years ago, we created the first ecosystem development department within the state's Economic Development Agency. And my team primarily exists at a systems level. So I'm not going into every single community and helping solve their problems. It's more about how can we create the infrastructure for our ecosystem to thrive. So where we have seen a lot of success, one is our partnership with our partners at EcoMap. So we have created a virtual front door to Indiana's ecosystem. So we have over 4,000 resources all in one place where entrepreneurs can leverage AI, matching, the online platform to help connect with resources in their community. But then we take that a step further. It's great to have a technology solution, but we need the humans behind the technology as well. So we've seen a lot of success in our statewide network of what we call ecosystem navigators. They are humans that are 100% dedicated to helping founders navigate the resources in their community. They have been in operation for about 1.5 years now. We have 10 of them across the state. In the first 6 months of 2024, they have worked with over 700 founders. And what has been particularly successful is not a deep dive. It's let's meet for 30 minutes, let's triage what your challenges are, and then let's hand you off to the appropriate contact. We don't need to try to be everything for everyone. We each have our niche, we each have our specialty, so it's how can we get them to the right resource.
Thanks, Morgan. And I'm sure everybody this week is going to have lots of questions for you about coming to Indiana and learning much more, because you've just scratched the surface there of the great things that you're doing. I also want to turn, if we can, to Eric Pages. I think Eric's there. Eric over here. Eric and I have known each other for 20 years. Eric is a well-known thought leader in economic development, but particularly in rural communities. Eric, turn to us a little bit and talk about this notion of connecting existing community assets, because you obviously have dealt with this a lot in rural communities. Or anything else you want to share from your perspective about some of these pointers that I put up on the board and your experience with case studies on it.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to join this very distinguished panel. Obviously working in rural places is more of a challenge because the scale is larger in terms of distance to get to places. You've got smaller numbers, so to put together events and networks becomes more challenging. And I think we as ecosystem advocates and champions really need to be thinking about, in a more systematic way, about how we can uplift rural communities and deal with some of these kind of structural issues that we see across rural. This is true of rural places in Latin America, rural places in Europe, rural places in Africa, rural places in the United States. Just to give you, I think it becomes very challenging if we look back when GEN and GEC first got started 10, 15 years ago, we were still kind of figuring out how to do this. We can always improve, but I do think we kind of have a good sense of what are the things to do. Your 10-point plan, our 10-point plan is a good guide for that. But even knowing what to do, it's hard for rural places to participate. Just to give you a scary statistic, we know when we've done some analysis of capacity in rural communities in the United States, something like 60% of rural places in the United States don't even apply for grant opportunities because they don't know about them or they don't have the capacity to do it. The mayor is a volunteer, the city council, the county board, they're all volunteers, and they have 2 other jobs. And these are even for grants where it's not even a competition, where if you put in an application, you're likely to get the resources. So we need to, I think, be more proactive and more aggressive in terms of capacity building to give these communities the ability to fully participate in the modern economy, which is about building entrepreneurial ecosystems. So it's not just sharing the information. I think we need to be much more proactive in terms of providing people with the resources, outside assistance if needed, the professional development opportunities, so that they can fully participate in these exciting kinds of movements.
Eric, let me do a follow-up question on this, because do you think that, and this will be something useful to get everybody else to comment on, do you think that there should be a special, exceptional, additional support for rural communities and ecosystem building?
I do, and there's a number of ways we might do that. You might have tiger teams that go out and work with communities. You might have special training. We already have in the United States, sometimes rural communities receive extra points when being scored for competitions and things like that, but that's not sufficient. So we need to think about other ways to do that, much more active engagement with these communities.
Okay. Maria, if I could turn to you. As you know, we have Maria, who runs SourceLink around the United States. You deal with both that rural issue, but comment, if you can, on any of these from your perspective in economic development.
So, I mean, a lot of them make sense, right? Identify what is in your area that can help, connect that together, figure out gaps. Figuring out the gaps is really, really important. That's where the data comes in, and then measure your success. I think when you asked at the beginning, what's the hard part? I think part of the hard part is measurement, because the standard KPIs for entrepreneurship are not there. And so over time, trying to understand what's the best measurement for knowing success. And a lot of that comes from way back at the beginning, thinking about what it is you want to change in your environment. What is it that needs to change? And then coming up with your own measures. So it's an interesting dynamic that goes on, and the data will help you figure those out.
Let's talk about measurement for a minute, because I'd be interested in your perspective on this. Of course, we look at SourceLink as being a leader in figuring out how to actually, tackle this. Ted, we have you here. You've done a lot of work, and I mean, Maria just said we don't really have standard measurements of entrepreneurship. Now, we know that there's 20 years of people that have been trying to develop those. Why don't we have them if we still don't have them? Because we have an awful lot of academic clout going into this.
The measures actually are derived from the base activity of entrepreneurs doing what they do in the communities, interacting and supporting those entrepreneurs. I had an experience coming in here, Jonathan, with Matthew, when we were putting together all the flags for the regions here in Latin Central and the Caribbean. And I just was impressed by the number of countries that are represented in this community, and would want to encourage everyone. Back when I was a pup, I started by engaging really with the YASMA model, the two parents of kind of economic theory at that point were Michael Porter, and then Dan Senior had written his book, Startup Nation. I was really interested in this concept. The idea of a startup nation was something that seemed very foreign to me. And what I realized is it comes down to small worlds. And in any community, rural, urban, any national kind of setting, any regional type of setting, there are entrepreneurs at work. And how do you unleash them to make them relevant, to celebrate them, to bring them together, and then combine with them the supports that are needed for them to thrive, not only from a policy standpoint, but really it's tactical, hand-to-hand combat. So, I've had the pleasure over my life to work in these small world type of settings. I started in Austria, and we did a national innovation system for Austria, and then we went to Denmark, and I spent 10 years developing a national system for them. I just celebrated the 10th year in Iceland. Who would ever think Iceland would be an entrepreneurial hotspot? 250,000 people on a frozen island in the middle of the North Atlantic. But as a matter of fact, they just celebrated their 7th unicorn exit, which is fundamentally, this is a place that's smaller than San Juan in terms of population size. You can imagine the economic impact of that type of entrepreneurship. It all started with small worlds. And understanding the dynamics, the leadership that's there, supporting that, and then developing your drivers, your rocks. The things that will ultimately be important from an economic development standpoint. How do you bring these things together in a way that you can kind of rinse and repeat? Once you have one or two leaders successful, it's amazing how it opens up the floodgates. There's this kind of critical mass. So I'd encourage everyone from the region. I'm so proud to be in Puerto Rico, having come from the U.S., because I honestly think it's the sleeping giant of our globe, and I believe that it's not sleeping very long. I think there's so many opportunities to really build an entrepreneurial powerhouse here in Latin America as well as the Caribbean.
Well, we appreciate that. I want to stick on this thing, if we can, though, on measurement, because, I think, from our perspective, and maybe part of the question is it the rule going to measure something different? And this is part of your point, Maria. Do we, maybe, Stacey Ann, do you want to comment on this? You want to introduce yourself and give a little bit about your experience on this? I mean, how do we measure the ecosystem performance? Is it because Ted says, well, a lot of this is to do with serendipity. You got a lot of variable factors. You might end up, and it's going to change in every community, and we don't quite know what ended up producing those unicorns that drove a large percentage of the population of Iceland to suddenly now be a successful ecosystem, or can we? Can we do any prediction here?
It's hard to predict generally unless you have that crystal ball, which I do not have. But one of the great things about entrepreneurs is that they'll always surprise you. So you can set out to measure, and then you will be surprised by new information that you don't have metrics to measure. And so you have to then become very creative about how to capture what they're doing, how they're doing it, how do they possibly think about doing it. And so we have to start all over again. So there's some basic things that we can try to measure, which, like numerically, how many entrepreneurs do we have in a space, how many exited, how many, we can't even really measure what the impact they have on the GDP, for instance. That is very difficult to measure if the company is expanded, they're external, they've grown, they've scaled. So we have serious measurement problems, but I think we are so preoccupied with measuring that we don't ask, why are we measuring? What are we measuring for? What are we hoping to gain? Is it so that we can support, that we can help, or that we can pat ourselves on the back to say we've done a good job? Why we're measuring matters also to what we're measuring. Yeah. And I think once we decide that, we can measure better, I think, but we don't necessarily know that.
And I think in this conversation, just so we're clear, so at GEN, we have a GEN research team, as you know, it's actually chaired by Ted, but we're doing a lot of work on generally speaking, on this notion of, how are we going to measure rates of new firm formation along with, available scholarship. I want to if we can, stay focused on how do we measure the performance of the ecosystem, which is a very, very hard thing to be able to do. Kevin, I'm going to get you to comment more on it, Stacey, in a second. But Kevin, tell me a little bit more. Introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are, and tell us a little bit about your thoughts on, how do you measure ecosystem performance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first, apologize for my voice. I lost it over the weekend. Still working to get it back.
Were you yelling at football teams? Is it, yeah?
No, the USA, they went out a while ago. Didn't have a chance to yell at them recently.
Yeah.
So I work for EcoMap Technologies, and that's a lot of what we try to do is figure out how do we not only measure the ecosystem, but how do we measure what matters. So we're not, you can easily over-index on so many metrics. It can be a 24/7 job, constantly measuring every minute detail. But what we try to do is figure out how do we measure the assets that exist, and that's typically organizations and the resources they provide. People are an incredibly hard thing to measure, and we try to kind of stay out of that. For example, we don't put people on a platform without them signing up for it, but they are really the heart of an ecosystem. So I think it's easier to try to get quantitative when it comes to assets like the resources, organizations, impact an accelerator can provide, how many people have come through, what's the funding through it. But then the qualitative part, the stories that are told, the people that actually unite the assets in the community, that's something that I don't have a great way to measure that, but I'd be interested in trying to figure out how.
Before we move off this, do you want to comment on this too? Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Geraldina Silveira. I come from Tec de Monterrey. I work in the Entrepreneurship Institute. And Kevin, what you just mentioned makes complete sense to what we're doing as well. So, recently we went through this MIT REAP program, which works with ecosystems. So 5 of our cities throughout the country participated, and we tried to measure our innovation capabilities as well as our entrepreneurial capabilities, which are very quantitative measurements. But then what we found out was that the results that although we have the capabilities, we're not getting the results. And that's when we had to go back, and what you presented in the first slide makes complete sense. No, how do we go back to our entrepreneurs and make them our true north? Because we went back to our entrepreneurs, to our different stakeholders, and we started to collect stories and what's happening, so that we can complement both the qualitative and the quantitative parts as well. And we're learning a lot to identify patterns, to identify behaviors. And Stacey, I think we're back to where you mentioned, no? Why are we measuring for? So each one of the cities is trying to define their purpose and what is it that they're looking for. And that's something that as a university we're helping to connect, no? The different stakeholders, have these conversations, provoke them, and just step back and let the conversation going. And it's really hard, and it's a long-term shot, which for us Mexicans sometimes it's hard because we want to see results very quickly. So that's my contribution.
Andrea, do you want to comment on this measurement question? Introduce yourself.
Sorry. Okay, I'm just going to grab it. So, pleasure to meet you all. My name is Andrea Mazariegos. I work in entrepreneurial ecosystem building in Guatemala and Central America. And that is a question that I've been asking myself for a while. Like, how do you measure entrepreneurial ecosystems? Because you have, yes, the quantitative measurements, like, oh yeah, how much more money is being produced and all of that. But then the qualitative measures regarding culture, how is it shifting in the ecosystem, how people are connecting, are really difficult to measure. And then you think about how entrepreneurial ecosystems are built, and then you go back to, okay, the basis of it, which is capacity building, is entrepreneurial capacity in and on itself that is made of connections between people. And people, as we have discussed, are very difficult to measure because we are ever changing and it's hard to predict how we're going to behave. So the approach that we have taken is 2 different types of measurements, like the quick measurements, which can be measured on a yearly basis, which is like, for example, let's take this university as a sample and let's see how many more women are leading technology projects on their incubator from year to year and see how that evolves. And then there's the, I would say, more profound measurement, which is understanding how the connections in the ecosystem are built. So for that, we've been using a tool that is called social network analysis. And it has given us really interesting results on how the ecosystem has been connected over the past few years. So we did an SNA in 2018, and it showed a really fragmented, really divided entrepreneurial ecosystem with a lot of silos, with a lot of, I would say, dispersed interaction between the players. And we ran another SNA in 2022, and it showed a bit more connection between actors that were not talking to each other before. So what we infer from that is like the culture is shifting towards a more collaborative approach. But of course, this is kind of interpretation of the data. So there's always a background behind that you have to take into account, for example, how you're interacting with people, where you're getting those conclusions from, and are they fundamented not only on what the data is telling you, but also what you've observed of the interactions in the ecosystem. So I would say no matter how much data you gather, it's always going to be I wouldn't call it a guessing game, but a game of being involved and being there and observing. Because it's not something that you can do from a detached perspective. Like you have to get your, how do we say in Latin America, las manos en la masa. Like you have to get there and really, really talk to people. And it's mostly about creating those interactions. So yeah, it's challenging, it's ever changing.
If I may add to this, we've been asking ourselves the same question forever as well. I'm Denise Rodriguez at Colmena 66 here in Puerto Rico, part of the Science Trust and also an affiliate of SourceLink. And I want to echo everything my peers have said in this panel, and I'm going to add something in case it's helpful for everyone else here. We, upon asking this question to ourselves for the 100th time, we said, like, okay, let's step back and let's put entrepreneurs at the center of this question. And our thought process was, what do we really want to showcase by what we're doing? And at the end of the day, at least for us at Colmena, we want to connect entrepreneurs to the right resource at the right time. And so we went back to, okay, so at the end of the day, what we want to showcase is what are those doors that you can, or those resources you can tap into at every stage of development of your business. So what we're doing through our first interactive report of the entrepreneurship, the state of the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Puerto Rico is showcasing 5 entrepreneurs that represent different types of entrepreneurship. Main streeters, innovation-driven, agriculture, and then different genders, different races, and also different geographies within the archipelago. And we were like, who helped you along your journey? And these are different resource partners, many of which are here today in this room. And then we just want to showcase those partnerships. And so that way, what we aim to do is when people see these stories, then they're like, oh, I'm also a main streeter and I'm at the idea stage. This person tapped into this resource, maybe I should do the same. And that's how we're tackling this.
That's fantastic. You know, when we started to ask this question 20 years ago too, we tried to work out how could you actually collect that data without asking people to tell you it, because they were all too busy to tell you when they're doing it. And so the only conclusion we came up with, but we've just never been able to implement it, is that one thing people would tell you what they're doing is on their LinkedIn account. So we discovered that what events they went to, what communities they were a part of, what interactions they had. So if you wanted to do anything to collect data to work out what was that formula, how much of it could have been serendipity, how much deliberate, who knows, but the point is the collection of those interfaces is what either made or broke somebody's experience. The trouble is we've never been able to convince LinkedIn to give us the data. So, you know, and of course, you know, that's always the challenge of, I guess, serious researchers. Ted, could you take care of that? We really haven't got it.
I'm not sure I can, but you know, it's amazing. I think we're all relying on waiting for Elon Musk to have an implantable something that we can put in everyone's head. No kidding, we've actually thought about accelerometers we could put on entrepreneurs so that we could figure out when they connect, how they connect, what they relate to. I've always wanted, we've ran an experiment where we actually were following at their permission communication structures and what data was moving between people and stuff. But I think, you know, to sort things out, you have to really look at the units of analysis. Economists will look at it, the unit of analysis of a regional economy or an economy in general, macroeconomic, whereas sociologists will look at it from the standpoint of social capital and networks, whereas an anthropologist will look at it on the basis of culture. But, the three things that kind of flesh out in the literature would be kind of the economic level, which could be at various geographic and jurisdictional boundaries, the firm level, and the individual level. Now, what really is a vexing problem with those three units of analysis is the function of a startup is by definition a diseconomic process. There's a J-curve. There's a period of startup where the reason they're not talking is because they have to invest in their deal. They're starting from a resource negative standpoint. They're running an entity that's cash negative, and they have to make it up through their wits. And then try to convince people to invest in them. And, an investable opportunity is, believe it or not, usually about 8 to 12 months down the life cycle. So actually following that journey, so it doesn't surprise me that storytelling and histogram-based data or qualitative data is pretty important, because that journey is either filled with friction or alternatively made frictionless by the supports that are given throughout that process. And that's why the ESO community is so critical to this conversation, because those points of friction for an entrepreneur on the ground starting a company is really, part of the process of actually converting something that would be, I would say, a market discovery mechanism to a firm. By definition, an early stage company is not a firm. It's a theory. It's a hypothesis. It's a assumption.
Experiment.
Yeah, I mean, and what I'm doing this book I'm excited about called Gumption. That's really about this. Who would do this? You think about it. Why would anyone in the right mind try to create something that doesn't exist? And that's why we're all here. That's why we all celebrate what entrepreneurship's all about. So, I appreciate, Jonathan. We can break it down into different units of analysis: macro, micro, social capital, interpersonal, anthropological, and go through the layers. But, we have to keep mindful that what we're trying to do is open opportunity for people who don't see it, don't have it, and then reducing friction for that life cycle of the J-curve that they all experience in the net, which is hard. That's hard work. I'm looking forward to hearing more about what Kevin's doing and what Maria's doing. And, Stacy and I had an hour and a half conversation last night about this, and I think we're still scratching our heads, but Stacy has forgotten what I know about it. Eric is the dean of the whole thing, so we're just waiting for him to tell us. So
Don't blame me.
I hope that's helpful.
I want to come back, Denise. It's great to hear what you're doing here in Puerto Rico, but I want to hear. Anthony, would love to hear from you if we can get your perspective on either this question of that we've been discussing in terms of how do we measure our work, or on any of the other elements if we can, and then I want to come to you, Gloria, if we can.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate being here. I think that as I look at kind of the principles.
You want to tell us who you are?
I know who you are, but I should have introduced you, but I want to let you introduce yourself.
My name is Anthony Hinojosa. I'm the Vice President of Government and International Affairs with the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. But I wanted to just make a quick comment. I love the principles that were laid out initially in the slides, the work that y'all are doing. But I think it's so important that we tell our entrepreneurs that they should be making their friends in their local communities, in their towns, their states, because those kind of ecosystems that kind of happen organically are where we're getting the best information. We're learning from each other. We are getting the pitfalls. We're getting the positives of what's going on to other entrepreneurs. And it's so important that we look towards not only people that look like us. There's a lot of Latinos here. We don't need to be looking just at Latino entrepreneurs. We need African American, Asian, LGBTQ+, all of the underserved entrepreneurs in the United States and the Caribbean. We need to all band together and learn from each other. And I think that creating those kind of organic ecosystems of support for each other, so that way when we're going into the next phase, whether we're leveling up our business or starting something new, we already have a good sense of what's going on, and leaning on each other to make that a reality, I think, is hugely important.
I think that's really important. This question, though, of like, how much do we leave this to chance, is a very, very important one, because, I'll never forget when, Carl Schramm took over the Kauffman Foundation. He turned around and said to us, I was sitting in the room, and said to us, okay, the first rule here is do no harm. So the first thing we got to do, because we actually have resources and we have time, and so the first thing we want to do is make sure that we don't take things in the wrong direction. And I think a lot of institutions, and by the way, we're guilty of this, everybody's guilty of this, we're absolutely convinced, even entrepreneurs are convinced of this, that I'm so excited about this idea and I'm so committed to it, I'm going to roll out this program and it's going to be great. But we forgot this cardinal rule. Is it actually something that the founders cared about? And so I think part of the responsibility is that if there are interventions by anybody in the community, the public sector, community, whether it be on a volunteer or professional basis, that we do need to know whether those things do actually have some kind of a causal relationship to the kind of results. And the results do matter because, of course, we have another whole part of Gen, which is focused just on government. As you know, tomorrow there will be all day, public sector meetings where we get government policymakers to share with each other what's working and what's not. And they always come back to the same thing. Whether they say it or not, I know what they all want. They all want to have the most amazing startup ecosystem in the world. And they want to say, if you want to be a startup, you want to come here. You want to come to Puerto Rico. And these are all the reasons why. We are the best place for you to start a company in the world. And so they need that data. They want to know, I want to invest in this. But the worst thing you can do is give them the wrong data. As they say, bad information is worse than no information, because all of a sudden they've done some harm. So follow-up comment from you on that. How much do we have to worry about, actually getting excited about interventions, but then doing the wrong thing?
Wow, that's the toughest question I think I've heard this whole time. I think that we have to, in the spirit of entrepreneurship, go with it. Whether it comes at us from a bad view or a good view, I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to give the best information, to put them in the best position to fulfill, whether it's their dreams, their legacies, whatever it is. And we have to just, have faith that in the entrepreneurial spirit that things are going to work out.
Absolutely. I want to get a perspective from Puerto Rico here. Gloria, you've obviously, we've heralded you a lot this morning as being really at the epicenter of much of this work. But give us your thoughts on any of these issues, if you can, this morning.
Well, as a knowledge manager for the past 40 years, I'm listening to everybody here, and I think I have a completely different point of view on the research that we need to be focusing on. I don't think that what we need is the research on what has been done in the past and how effective it has been. I think that what we need is a point of departure for the future. And we need to do research that helps us to innovate. We're building new things. And I would shift completely the efforts to figuring out what is missing, what is needed, where are the opportunities, and then do co-creation, including, and I think you all have mentioned the importance of having different points of view and leveraging diversity, and by bringing very different folks to the observation, looking from an anthropological point of view, you are going to see things differently, and everybody can build on what the other one is seeing, but we're talking about entrepreneurship and innovation. I think all the research should focus in what new can be done. And so it would be more research on the product development, on concept development, on how you communicate, but more of a moving forward rather than looking back to what has happened. And the world is moving too fast. There are too many things happening, and there are too many failures in our efforts. So I think that if we can focus on finding those new opportunities and then checking on who would be interested in that and how you can present those new opportunities in a better light. Our time researching would be better spent. And I have been researching for 40 years. I love doing research and I enjoy connecting the dots. So probably I'm talking about not doing what I have been doing for a long time. But I think that we need to shift the effort in a different direction. And I think we need to do research for innovation. And that effort will probably yield more. So I thought it was important to add that perspective.
Yep. And I think in the innovation environment, I'll never forget Tom Khalil when he was working for Barack Obama. I sat down with him and I said, "Oh, this is great. The president's interested in startups and he knows what it is. He's interested in new firm formation. So what kind of initiatives are you going to do?" He goes, "Well, I don't want to do any programs." He said, "We're going to set some man on the moon goals and we're just going to attract everybody to work together and figure out how to build and develop something amazing." I want to bring that, if we can, into the university context. Holly, thanks for joining us. You can introduce yourself, but Holly brings the perspective of an organization, of course, that represents a lot of the entrepreneurship centers of universities. Universities unto their own. I remember in UNC, Judith Cohn went down there and I said, "What are you going to do in your new job?" She said, "Oh, I'm going to build the North Carolina's university ecosystem." She called it an ecosystem even whenever that was, 15 years ago. She said, we're going to build an ecosystem within a university. And I was like, really? Talk to us about this. Is this measurement question, or are any of these things relevant from your perspective in terms of what universities are looking at focusing on?
Sure, yes. Holly DeArmond. I work with higher education entrepreneurship centers. And something that Gloria said is something I've been harping on for probably 10 or 15 years. And a lot of ecosystem partners in economic development don't want to spend enough time at the ideation stage, which is the sweet spot of universities. We work with first-time founders often because they're students. And they need help, they need guidance, they need data, they need research on what it means to innovate and ideate and get that idea into a viable business. And so I think universities have started creating their own ecosystems on their campuses, in their systems, nationwide, globally, to try to solve that and say, hey, how can we get more funding, more support, more data on what it means to take an idea to a business? Because these are often nascent ideas, first-time founders, they don't have life experience, they don't have work experience, but they've got a kernel of something, and we want to see them succeed and not fail or learn from that failure. And so I think that's why the universities have gotten really focused on the ecosystems, is that they need support outside of the classroom to really make these bright, young, next generation founders succeed.
Right. I want to make sure we hear from you, Arturo. Thank you so much indeed for being here. Of course, we talked a lot about your research this morning on the plenary around telling us about what's happening in Hispanic entrepreneurship in the United States. But you're obviously housed on a university campus. You're at Stanford. Maybe you could give us a little bit of reaction to what Holly said, but also so many of your observations on this question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Arturo Cáceres, I'm with Latino Business Action Network. So we're an independent nonprofit, but we do partner with Stanford University. So we're housed there at Stanford. And research is one of the things that we do. We have 3 pillars. One of them is research, foundational research on Latino entrepreneurship across the U.S. So these are Latinos in the U.S. And Puerto Rico. And every year we issue a big report. We do a summit on campus. It's a big thing, probably the biggest sort of gathering like this at Stanford. And it's all focused on Latino entrepreneurship. So one of the precepts for us is to embrace failure from the perspective of failure is critical to learning. Failure is critical to innovation. Failure is why Silicon Valley is what it is. And what we're trying to do is take that same concept nationally for Latinos, because Latinos tend to be very underrepresented in a lot of these spaces in the U.S. And while our focus is Latinos, we expect that the impact of our work is going to be much broader, because what we are seeing is that Latinos are incredibly entrepreneurial. Latinos have a lot of things that are very positive, making already a large and growing impact on the U.S. economy as entrepreneurs, but they're facing a lot of unfair gaps in the ecosystem. And what we know about those gaps are their intrinsic, structural, sometimes perception biases that are also affecting African American business owners and women business owners. For an economy like the United States that now depends on all of those groups for its future economic growth, understanding that is critical. And so it's not just Isabella Guzman, the SBA administrator, who uses our data, but also we've had, I'm going from here to the Department of Commerce in Washington. We're meeting with them. We also partner with other organizations, the Treasury of the U.S. government. They're also looking at this data because it's a big thing now for the U.S. economy, and probably for a bunch of other economies, that whenever you look at underrepresented groups and start to understand the challenges that they're facing, if you could unlock that, you will unlock huge potential for your economy. So that's one of the things that we do. The other thing is, to your point, we focus very much on the entrepreneurs. Our research is from the perspective of the business owners, the founders who are Latino. We also have 2 programs at Stanford with Stanford faculty that we created for Latina and Latino business owners or startup founders, where we bring them from across the country and Puerto Rico to Stanford, and we put them through a program. It's for us to understand them, but also for them to understand each other. And we marry that with this research to create this full narrative of who we really are. Even for ourselves as Latinos in the United States, often you can get lost in that because the media will give you one perception, and that sometimes is a cognitive disconnect from what you know your own community to be, but you can't articulate why. You're just feeling that frustration, and you're seeing it manifest when you don't get the bank loan or you don't get the investment. And so what we try to do is marry the 2 together and really learn from them and have them learn from each other so that they can go out and make a bigger, better ecosystem for everyone. And the third part of our work, so first is research, second is these 2 scaling programs that we have at Stanford. The third part is ecosystem building. From the very beginning, we've been very conscious about inviting everyone in the ecosystem to join us. And while our lens is Latinos in the U.S., we know this is a much bigger idea. It will help a lot of other people. So we invite bankers, VCs, government representatives, everyone to join us in either participating, helping teach these programs so they get to know the founders directly, but also to work with us on the research so that it's their research too, it's their data. And so, we've been at this now just a few years, but we hope to do more. We love being here. Thank you for this opportunity. We're learning quite a lot, and we have increasingly connections across Latin America. While our focus is the U.S., we do see that leverage point, and so we are going to look to see what we can do more broadly beyond the United States, especially since the U.S. economy is increasingly connected to the rest of the hemisphere. But we do have 2 sessions. You want to learn more at 2:15 today. We're doing 1 session, and we'll cover a little bit of our research, but you also meet some of our founders. And then tomorrow we'll do one more on the VC side of it, the investor side of it. So the session today is at 2:15. The session tomorrow will be at 3:30.
Thank you, and thank you again for being here. We were very excited that we could have you here because we all read your work and follow it. We're going to, with everyone's permission, I'm going to explain to you what happens at lunch because some of you may start looking at your watch. So we serve lunch in our Gen Village. It's very casual. You get lunch. Pick whoever you want to have a conversation with, and there's plenty of seating and enjoyment. I'm going to take the liberty of asking if we can extend this by 5 to 10 minutes because we'll do this. If anybody absolutely needs to eat lunch on noon specifically, we're not going to think you're rude, but we're going to do this. But I just want to assure you, you're not going to be late for lunch if you decide to stay. So forgive me for that. That's my bad as moderator today. But I do want to make sure that we've heard from a couple of the others of you, and also give a chance for anybody that wants to any of our participants around the table if wants to add a kind of concluding thought before we wrap up. And I do want to, before we do that though, well, when we've done that, I'm going to ask Cecilia, who's really leading on this work with us, is going to tell you a little bit about the fact that this discussion was really a teaser for some deeper discussions that will be following very shortly after this, and of course we hope will happen informally over the course of the next 4 days. But if we could, Cheryl, I want to ask you and Felipe to make a couple of comments because you give us some different perspectives from different parts of the world. Cheryl, as you know, is our managing director for Gen Jamaica and has been doing an amazing job. And I also want to ask Felipe, who we've known for many years, to give us a little bit of a brief perspective from Brazil, if you could. So, Cheryl, go ahead.
So I'd like to follow up on some of the comments I heard earlier. And one of our greatest challenge is the mismatch between the desired outcome and the actual objectives of who is funding what, where, when, and how. So the gap tends to be wide because he who plays the piper pays the tune. Who pays the piper pays the tune, right? Whatever, right? And so if it's research, and we're talking from a Jamaican perspective here, a lot of the funding agencies like the IDB and the World Bank, they have their own metrics, and it doesn't match. So if you look from a Caribbean perspective, our culture is big, and that leads what we do in entrepreneurship, right? But it's not recognized. So therefore, what the results are, we're not seeing the impact in our economy, among our people. And then when we present you what we want, you throw through the window. So literally, it is difficult for us, right? So we have to find unique ways to build our ecosystem from a people perspective. So we start with who you know will support you, and you continue to build on that. So from my perspective, I use everything that happens at Gen to inform and educate. And some will pick up the crumbs, and some will grab the whole slice of the bread. And eventually, we'll get there. But it's a hard road because focus in the different areas. So government is focusing on one thing, and the financiers are focusing on other things, and the entrepreneurs need something else. How do you bring it together? So it's for us to really push through, to work on that. And there's still a big question. Are we really impacting who and where we are to impact? And that's basically it.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we've been learning is that, harmonizing what we measure is, of course, very, very difficult to do in all research. But it's one of the great potential challenges of this community. I mean, the ecosystem building community has really matured and grown over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. And as we like to say at Gen, you should be bold. You should say, you know what, we're going to take a leadership role. We're going to go out there and suggest. And this is something that, at Kauffman, it was often, we don't want to actually tell people what to do. We know what to do. But we also don't even want to say, this is really the direction that people should go in. But a lot of the time, because of the point that Cheryl made, there is a huge amount of demand to say, just go ahead and come out and suggest. Don't suggest it's the way or the perfect way, but come out and say it's a way, and we are going to move forward on that. And so I respond to what Cheryl says with encouraging each and every one of you to be part of that ecosystem leadership, that shared leadership model, which says, you know what, we're not trying to tell the rest of the world what to do, but if you want, because I can tell you the politicians come and go every 2 or 3 years, and they're looking for some long-term institutional intelligence, as is easily captured in this room. So thank you. Felipe, Brazil, you're an example of a country that keeps switching your government all the time, like all of them. So,
Absolutely.
But it doesn't matter because the ecosystems are building. You've got thriving ecosystems in São Paulo, and but tell me more from obviously Brazil. And when I come and visit with Sabrai down there, you've got 650 equivalent of SBDCs in Brazil. Tell me about the 650 cities they have offices in, they told me. But anyway, tell me more from a perspective of, grassroots ecosystem building in Brazil. Any comments on what we discussed today from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. I'm from the Brazilian Association of Startups. And coming to the point of measuring success, I think one of the main challenges is that it takes time. So it takes 5 to 10 years for a startup to be successful. And, well, you just said, politicians come and go every three years or so. And then you never have that long-term view of even assessing data in order to learn what happens in terms of successful entrepreneurship. In Brazil, for instance, folks got really surprised when we had our first unicorns, and we had like 10 unicorns in just 1 year, 2009, I would say, 29, yeah. But the reason why you should have to look back 10 years from that to understand what was happening that led to the creation of those unicorns. And this is extremely difficult to do. One of the studies that we made, we had data from application of startups for an acceleration program, and we were looking back 6 years to try to understand what was there in common for the startups that were successful and the failures as well. And what we found out is that we could explain somehow the failures, basically startups that took too long to validate their products, startups with solopreneurs, they tend to fail. But we could not really explain the successes. There was nothing from the data that would explain the success, but we realized that all the successful entrepreneurs were real leaders. In a sense, they had that bright on their eyes, and they were really pushing for their businesses. And then that's why we started a personality analysis. We started to add the personality analysis and on selecting entrepreneurs and a leadership development program as well. But it's a challenge for sure.
Thank you, Felipe. Jess, a quick comment from you, and then I'm going to invite anybody to make two sentences if you want to, way back into the conversation, and then we're going to wrap up with Cecilia. So.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Jess Edwards. I'm a project-based ecosystem builder from the U.S., and I'm currently on my 5th project. I am in Virginia working on a $25 million biotech hub project with Virginia Tech, the healthcare system there, and local government. Based on the conversation about data and what's important to track and how you track it, I would say we're having success, and I think this could be applicable everywhere with real-time data. The real-time data is important for the ecosystem builders because we're the ones currently implementing and trying to identify all the entrepreneurs that need help. So one thing that we've done is we've established an ESO task force in the region. This is something where all of the entrepreneur support organizations have gotten together, and we're really looking at the region as one venture engine. We're all doing different work, but ultimately it's to bring all of the entrepreneurs forward from early stage all the way so that they can scale and grow. So that's one thing that we're doing, where we focus on top of the funnel, early stage. We get together and as data, as you all know, is sometimes hard if people can't share it or they don't want to share it. We just do baseline data. So everybody comes to the table with the entrepreneurs they're supporting, so name of the company and what stage they're at. And we meet quarterly and we say, okay, who needs help where, right? So if they went through my program and then I say, okay, they've graduated from the accelerator program, but now they need to talk to an accountant or IP attorney who has that connection for specifically this startup. So having real-time data and putting it in a visual like a funnel, when you have investors come, you can share and say, this is what the region is doing. Here's in real time the entrepreneurs we can support. And it's a really great way to guide and direct resources and in real time kind of know where to focus all your energy. So,
yes, thank you. Excellent. Okay, couple of quick concluding comments from anybody that wants to add. Maria, I want to come back to you.
So you asked me how we could affect economic development, and so I just thought I'd throw out there, we're doing a lot of work right now, actually in the Kansas City region, looking at what's next for entrepreneurship. And there are some macro measures that we'll be using. We have a lot of micro measures, but I just thought you guys might be interested in this, because we can tell the number of jobs created by first-time employers. Economic developers care about that. We also know that entrepreneurship can change wealth gaps, and so we're going to start measuring the wealth gap that we're changing because of entrepreneurship. Economic developers care about that, and so do a lot of other people. And then one of the other things that we're going to really look at is how many of our businesses are selling outside of the community. That's traded sector. Traded sector affects your GDP, so economic developers care about that. So stay tuned for how we'll pull all that together, but it's coming.
Thank you, Maria. That's great. Anybody else want to add? Anybody else got a pressing comment to add? Please, Morgan.
Yeah, I would just like to express my gratitude for the structure of this conversation. I know we've talked previously, but oftentimes we attend entrepreneurship events and we talk about entrepreneurs matter, ecosystems are important. We all work better when we work together, but then we don't move past that. So I'm very excited that the conversation today and the sessions that Cecilia is putting on this afternoon are the so what. We can all agree that these values are important, and let's start the conversation from there. So
okay, I'm just going to correct you on one thing.
Okay.
Those aren't values.
Oh.
Those are tactics.
Tactics,
okay? And
principles, values. You're proving my point, Jonathan.
Yeah, there we go. Meaning you and I think alike.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's a perfect transition over to Cecilia, and I just want to thank you. We deliberately did this session at 11 o'clock on first day on Monday because we're hoping that we could start the conversation further down the road than, as Morgan said, than we traditionally do. So we hope that whether it's in the bar or whether it's in the informal meetings in the village, but will happen a lot, or whether it's in the sessions that Cecilia's about to tell you, we could start. Maybe it's not exactly phrased or set up the way you might do it, but let's start from some of this level that you're all at. I might say the collective experience of the people in this room is unprecedented in terms of ecosystem building. We're very happy to come to the Startup Champions Network and meeting in Virginia, and I looked around the room and I just thought it's amazing all the experience that many of those and many of us around the room have. So let's try to begin the conversation further down the road, and I think that's what Morgan's challenge is. So Cecilia, how are we going to do that with our break?
So as you can see, the people that are sitting around the table have a lot of wisdom to share, but so do the people sitting around us. So what we want to do is invite you all to lend your voice. You are all ecosystem building practitioners. You do this work all the time. So what we want to do is have a conversation together. So there's not the sage on the stage. We do have some people that are leading some of these workshops. So at 1 o'clock, we have 3 different workshops. And the idea is to have a conversation with each other and to find out what the commonalities are and what the themes are. And here are some, Justin and other people know, I don't like the term best practice. I think it makes us a little lazy, like, oh, we found the best way and it should work for everybody. And that's not necessarily true. So what we want to do is find noteworthy practices that you can adapt for your ecosystem. Nobody knows your ecosystem better than you do. And what works for you may not work for somebody else. But you know what? I don't want to have to go down that rabbit hole to see whether or not it works. Maybe somebody can say, don't try that because when we did it was such a horrible mistake. So the sessions are led by people who are doing the work. They're going to be our breakout catalysts. They're going to catalyze you to have these conversations. So they're going to introduce themselves, but very briefly, 2 or 3 minutes, that's it. We're all going to sit. We're going to sit. That may be the hardest thing for some of you. Okay, just say. Then we're going to.
And I'm not invited, by the way.
So then we're going to sit at round tables and have a conversation, and we're going to take notes. And what we would like you to do is find out from each other, what are you doing that works? What did you do that didn't work, right? Who did you get to support you? And then we're going to share out some of those across the tables. And then what we would like to do is collect that information to share it back to you and out wider. So you are all the experts in the room, okay? And what you contribute is really important. And then on Wednesday, I believe we're going to end up at 1 o'clock, but I'm not sure. You keep an eye on your app, is the storytelling session. So storytelling is what's going to touch hearts and minds. The metrics and the data, and this is why Jonathan started with that, is what's going to open up the checkbooks and the wallets. Yeah. Okay, so we have to be able to put that together, and we have wonderful people who storytell, who've written books, who have podcasts, who do social media. They're going to tell and share their tips and advice, but also the collective brain power in the room to start cultivating how do we tell that story, because we want to help you share the impact of your work, and we're going to expand it further, right, so that other people know. So that's what we're going to work on. But first, lunch.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, I just want a final comment. Arturo, I just want to mention, I really want to emphasize this notion of failure as we move forward, because actually, Jen, I never really tell this story, but we actually got started on the campus of Stanford with Tina Seelig. Yeah. And Tina said, you want to do this thing called Global Entrepreneurship Week, and you're going to build all these communities and build them into an organization. I said, yeah. And she goes, okay. So I said, what are we going to do? She says, we're going to have a big event. And she said, it's going to be a failure. I said, it's going to be a failure. She goes, no, not a failure. It's going to be all about failure. And I just want to say that's actually the first place we started. And can I tell you the most wonderful thing about failure? And I hope this will come out in the workshops. Please tell us what's not working in the ecosystem, because the nice thing about failure is that it always goes with comedy. I had no idea. When I went around the Stanford campus and I heard the entrepreneurs stand up and talk about their worst failure, it was just like people were laughing away. It was so great. It was full of joy. Failure was full of joy. It wasn't full of depression. So let's remember that when we go into these conversations. But thank you so much indeed. We look forward to seeing you all and in these sessions. But I do want to point out also that anything you want to contribute from a resource perspective, please be sure to let Cecilia know, because we're collecting resources you're willing to share. And then finally, I just want to mention, if anybody's actually interested in this data question, we do have a Gen Research team. If you're interested, if you're not part of the Gen Research meeting and you're interested in being invited to that and participating in that, please let either Matt or Tom know on our staff, or Ted, since he's sitting here. And we would welcome that, because this is an ongoing, continuous conversation for us as to what we measure, how we measure, and just because it's hard, we're not going to give up. Thank you. Bon appetit.
Bye.